Hi guys, welcome to Snakes and Adders. This is another episode in our advanced series. This is episode 11, and today we're going to be looking at Blanding's tree snakes, Toxicodryas blandingii. This is a snake that I've looked forward to covering for some time. We've had quite a few more examples come through. Finding text and data on them is difficult. I enlisted the help of my friend Francis, who sent me some pictures of his African herping books, just to see what notes they had as well, to try and give us as well thought through an overview as possible. I hope you enjoyed the video. I enjoyed making them, so no doubt it's going to be long. I can't hold the snakes and read the manuscript I've written at the same time. Same as with the mangrove, I need to concentrate when I'm holding them, so I'll pause, hold each of the examples, safely stow them away in a box, and then continue. I'll just riff about them when I have them out, but I may repeat myself slightly, so just bear with us. So this is an impressive opistoglyphic or rear fanged species from tropical West and Central Africa. In fact, during research for this video, I've come to have a newfound respect for this species. I've only covered one other snake, which I'll put in brackets because actually that's not true, with a range as large as this so far within my series, and oddly enough that snake had an almost identical range, and that range belonged to the royal python. I'll pause there. Francis actually corrected me. The Dionys rat snake has a larger range, and you know, you can be forgiven for forgetting about that cute little rat snake, because that's one tough SOB. It runs pretty much from Europe right through to Japan. It's amazing. So yeah, that's a tough snake. But let's say equatorial species, this is a wide ranging species, and let's just put a bit of detail on that. So this is a map of Africa. That is the western part of the range up in the Gambia, and then we come right down to the borderlands of Kenya and Uganda. That is a distance of 5,713 kilometers as the crow flies, or 3,550 miles. Passenger jets roughly fly at 500 miles an hour, and a passenger jet would take 7 hours 5 minutes to cross the range of Toxicodryas blandingii. So let's put a bit more meat on those bones. A flight from New York to LA and New York there is 2,446 miles, and a passenger jet only takes 4 hours 55 minutes. So the plane is still in the air for another hour and 20 minutes crossing the United States. That's impressive, really impressive. And we're not talking about different subspecies or different types of Toxicodryas. That is just Toxicodryas blandingii. It's amazing. Yet when we looked at the Boiga video last week, within half of this range, we've got 7 or 8 different subspecies. It's unbelievable. Quite possibly with a range that size, some more work might need to be done to study them to see if there is any DNA changes across the range. In fact, certain texts even show the distribution right across Africa into Kenya and Sudan, although these seem to be localized reports rather than consistent parts of a set area that the animal has. To say that this region throughout the year runs the gambit of weather changes would be a vast understatement. Weather patterns across the region can range from torrential tropical storms and flood zones to near total drought. So it completely runs the gambit. This snake is often grouped in with the genus Boiga, the Southeast Asian cat snakes, such as Boiga dendrophylla that we covered last week. Now, a good few Boiga are known for being sensitive, delicate souls in captivity. So a snake with as far-reaching a range as this, it's fair to say that this species is adaptable. Sure, they come from the humid rainforest and the gallery forests and riverine forests of the regions, but the changes in seasonal rainfall in these regions is marked and is going to influence them throughout their annual cycle. The continent of Africa raises from west to east. Eastern populations are found at altitudes from 700 meters to 2,000 meters above sea level. To the west, they are found down to sea level itself. It shares a good deal of its range with its cousin and the only other member of the genus, the powdered tree snake or powdered cat snake, Toxicodryas pulverenta. The species lives sympatric with the Blanding's tree snake, and the two seemingly do not interbreed. So just to explain that for people who might not know, to be allopatric means that species or subspecies do not occur in the same place. To give an example of this, before they were elevated to species status, the Mexicana complex of Mesoamerican king snakes, so Mexicana theri, Mexicana greeri, and it's not included anymore, but Mexicana alterna, which became alterna very early on. These were all allopatric. They had defined regions of origin, which did not overlap with any of the other species discussed. So they are allopatric. To be sympatric means that the exact opposite. They occur in the same regions, in the same biomes, in the same habitats, and they don't influence one another negatively, and they coexist. So that's quite interesting as well. The powdered tree snake, though, pulverenta, is a much smaller species, maturing to around 1.2 meters in length. Although the average length of a Blanding's tree snake is from 1.8 to 2.1 meters, 6 to 7 feet, records show animals reaching 2.8 meters or 9 feet in length. Indeed, having visited wholesalers over the years, they've had these guys in stock, and I've seen some truly monstrous specimens, easily 8 feet in length and very impressively built. Blanding's tree snakes go through an ontogenetic colour change as they mature, as well as displaying sexually dimorphic coloration and patterns. This is the patternation and colour and palette of a baby. Sexual dimorphism is the ability to visually tell the difference between a male and a female without any of the intrusive checks, such as probing, popping, pinging, whatever you want to call it. As youngsters, this is a spectacularly beautiful species. I mean, seriously, drop dead gorgeous. The head is an off-white to yellow. The background colour of the neck and the anterior part of the body starts to grey off to an almost steel colour. And then as we move down the body to the posterior, a greater level of reds and pinks become present. Large flank blotches occur along the body, total length. They are usually somewhat offset, but occasionally may make bands. Females retain much of this pattern, but the colour palette changes considerably. Shades of buff, tan, copper and gold take over. The overall impression becomes much more muted than in early life, but nonetheless is still very attractive. So I'm going to pause there and I will get the female out and we'll have a butcher's at her, and hopefully she's in a good mood. Bear with me. Good morning, gorgeous. Come on. I know. Such an imposition. Come on, my love. I know we're not going to hurt you. This is a big, proven female, long-term captive, Toxicodryas blandingii. A very alert, triggered, active snake. Let me keep you, I'll step out of the way. There we go. She is around 7 feet long. Absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, and she is on it. You can see she's got just a slight rostral abrasion on her nose. These are active snakes that push inside their vivs. I know you want to come and sit on my shoulder, but I really don't want that. These have a formidable reputation normally, and actually this pair has proven to be pretty easy to work with. Something I'll probably repeat later, but I want to show an example of. Something that ties them definitely to Boiga, or at least be in a super close relation, is that they have dorsal scales, enlarged back scales that cover the spine, straddle the spine and run all the way down the body. This is a feature of all Boigas, and Toxicodryas have the feature too. So at the very least, if they're not Boiga, they're about as close as it gets to being Boiga, or Boiga as close as it gets to being Toxicodryas, whichever way round. Just look at her. What the camera probably doesn't pick up is that shimmer and shine she has, almost a metallic quality to the skin. Super smooth, and it fragments the light as it shines upon her, gives her an almost metallic quality. I mean, she's a lump of a snake. She's got to be approaching 7 feet in length, She's a real beauty, aren't you? Hello, darling. That's it. So we'll pop her back. I don't want to wind her up. That lid to sit on. Males darken off considerably, with a greater level of melanin becoming present in the skin. Certain examples, like the individuals I saw at the wholesalers that time where I saw them, they were solid black, this face, with grey cream underside or ventral scales. And these made for incredibly visually impressive animals. I prefer, however, the colours of the animals we have here, where there is considerable darkening off of the palate, but it also involves many shades of grey and black, which is incredibly attractive, but yellow's been retained in the form of wider bands, attractively counterbalancing the darker colours. So at that point, I'll now get the male out. I think I've got a feeling he's coming down to shed, but he still looks gorgeous anyway. I'll show you. Come on, my love. I know. Yeah, don't worry. I'm going to hurt you. You're a bit more triggered than her, aren't you? Come on. This is the male. Now, it's subtle. This is a subtle pattern and colour, but lovely shades of grey and black with this yellow skin. And there's a high level of yellow interstitial skin, which is between the scales. So when they puff up and gape and get enraged, they can make themselves look very impressive indeed. He is shorter and slighter built, and he's probably around 6 feet in length. He gave a little gape as I went in to get him, but actually these are incredibly well behaved examples of Toxicodryas. Normally they can be somewhat tasty when it comes to their temperament, and you should watch yourself, which we'll get to at a later point. But I'm relatively confident with these two examples that they are tolerant enough for this video to be able to be held on camera. Go on, my love, let's see your face. There we go. Look at you. You're gorgeous, aren't you? Absolutely breathtaking. Wonderful looking snakes. So I'll put you back separately. Let me pop you back in here, love. Right, there we go. Good boy. Right, now we can crack on. What do you think? And as you can see, you can definitely tell the difference between males and females. Females are the copper, tans and golds. Males are either solid black or blacks, greys with yellow crossbars. This species is also in possession of another very interesting feature. I'm going to slide this because I'm not sure the camera will pick it up, even though I blew the photo up massive. This species is in possession of something called scale sensillae, which are around the edges of its head scales. And you might not be able to see them, but they're like freckles almost in the scales, in the post-oculars, supraoculars, and then you've got the temporals, parietal. They've got these dots all the way around them, and it actually continues onto the first few rows of standard scales as well. We're not 100% sure what the purpose is, but it's thought to detect air pressure changes. Other arboreal tropical colubrids such as Spoloites pilatus, the tiger rat snake, also is in possession of these scales. And these sensillae are actually more commonly seen on sea snakes and fossorial or burrowing species. Let's just slide you back so we get the old pictures back in. There we go. This species has bounced between genuses Toxicodryas and Boyget for a long time. In fact, this argument I feel is far from over. They were placed in Boyget as recently as 2015 by Carlino and Powells, before being returned to Toxicodryas in 2018 by Sprawls. This species was first described by Hallowell in 1844 as Dipsas blandingii, and this was the same genus used when the mangrove snake was first described. And Dipsas is a genera of New World slug and snail eating snakes, so it was an interesting choice for an African colubrid that doesn't eat the same prey. I can't work out the logic, apart from maybe the big offset head and the elongate slender body being the only sort of physiological commonalities between the two. A few changes ensued, but the first mention of the two warring genera was Toxicodryas by Hallowell in 1857. So it came first. It came first. Bear with me. The basilisk has seen the Blanding's female and is not happy. Bear with me one sec. Let me move her. Yes, she's not going to hurt you. Don't work with animals, guys. It's alright, she's gone. Jesus. Start again. A few changes ensued, but the first mention of the two warring genera was Toxicodryas by Hallowell in 1857, 13 years after the original description. So, Toxicodryas did come first. Boiga did not appear on the scene until used by Schmidt in 1923 to describe this species. Two other confirmations of this name saw it remain within Boiga until 1992, when Miert returned it to Toxicodryas. It has then flip-flopped persistently between the two genera ever since. In truth, I wouldn't lose sleep if you described it as Boiga. Superficially, as discussed, they are identical. They have the same heavy offset head, cat's eye, defense behaviors, which include the rearing up in a series of S's, inflating their body and gaping widely. Envenomation strategies are the same, as well as sharing a scutellation peculiarity which sees the enlarged set of dorsal scales that straddles the spine down the length of the body. Essentially, in my mind, indeed, if they are not Boiga, they are very closely related. There's just too many similarities. This species is largely arboreal in habit in the wild and a skilled climber, and found as high up in the trees as 30 metres. They can pursue their favourite prey birds easily, and they will come down to cross open spaces and cross roads. They also are relatively common around human settlements, where the bats, rats and mice make tasty morsels for them to eat. In captivity, though, they are not as strictly arboreal as you would imagine. Seemingly just as comfortable on the floor. Care would therefore need to be taken to ensure thermoregulation could take place left to right within the enclosure, as well as up and down. And this is the same problems that we discussed with the mangrove snake video. This species is predominantly nocturnal and actively hunts a variety of prey, including lizard, bird, bats and rodents. Babies can be resistant to rodent prey initially, and either live or scented prey must be used to entice reticent youngsters. Babies should be maintained in simplistic, small, tub-type enclosures where they can be raised more easily and less likely to have stressors act upon them. As the snakes begin to grow and approach a metre in length, they can be transitioned to a larger vivarium, maybe measuring 36 by 18 by 36, so 36 wide, 36 tall, 18 deep. That's inches, by the way. Again, this is just in an effort to avoid stress where possible. At around 6 feet in length, we can transition into their final home. And this size would be 6 foot long, 2 foot deep and 4 foot high. This is a considerable tank and must be care must be taken to design a way of heating the enclosure to ensure thermoregulation can take place. Personally, I would opt for a 250 watt ceramic bulb within a cage on a bracketed fitting at one end of the tank, with a basking bow approximately 12 to 18 inches beneath the bottom of the ceramic bulb, and this would be controlled to run at between 30 and 32 degrees Celsius during the day, with it cooling slightly at night to around 27 or 28 degrees Celsius. This would be achieved by using a day-night thermostat, such as units on the market from either Habistat or Microclimate. It may be difficult to ensure enough heat penetration into the lower levels of the enclosure, with it being 4 foot tall. And a second heat source may be required in this tank if used in isolation or resting on the floor. So if used in isolation, what I mean by that is if you have vivs underneath, you can benefit from the latent heat rising up from the other animals below. And therefore we wouldn't need a second heat source because the ground level would be gently warmed anyway. If this viv, because it's so big, more than likely would sit directly on the deck or onto a stand, then you're going to have to think about providing some sort of bottom heat to at least a third to a half of one side, same side that the ceramic's on, heated to a cooler level, maybe 27, 28 degrees that they can get away from. So this could take the form of a 24 by 11 heat pad running on another thermostat set to 27 to 28 degrees with the option to move away to the cool end. Lighting should be provided overhead and to the same side as the heat source. I will take you through, I've explained that in a bit greater detail, then I'll pause to go through it. And this would take, the lighting would take the form of either a shade dweller kit, 7% 8 watt, but in truth, that more than likely would be lost in an enclosure of this size. So I personally would opt for the 6% Forest Pro T5 kit, probably the 39 watt size, which is about a 2.5 foot, 3 foot tube, to ensure the heated half of the enclosure received good quality light. Because these animals are essentially equatorial, the lighting would remain on a 12-12 cycle year round, as well as the changes from day to night heat. So I'll pause there and just go on to the next page. It's a long one today. We'll just quickly go through this. Even though this is an advanced level video, I know that there'll be beginners and intermediates that potentially aspire to be able to do this. So the advanced keepers, you've got to maybe just understand we have to go back and maybe simplify things slightly for people that maybe don't get it. And what I'm talking about is the vivarium, so just a very basic line drawing here, where we would have a bow or climbing branch. We've got a ceramic bulb, or a chi, as people annoyingly call it on forums, and this is within a cage to stop it from burning the animal. It needs to be a fitting that's rated for the bulb. It needs to be rated to 250 watts. These are industrial strength heaters and will melt a standard fitting in short order, so make sure. And it needs to have heat rated cable on it as well, which is usually butyl rubber, which is what they use for things like kettles and steam irons. The heater is going to emit heat. Ceramics don't necessarily fire the heat down. They'll go in all directions, but the heater plate is on the bottom, so most of the heat radiates down. Bear in mind we have a fairly shallow gradient and we have a huge viv. So if we use something that's very directional, we can heat one area and then the rest of the tank is clock cold, which actually works counterintuitive to what we want to create. If it was a desert animal, such as collared lizard, crotophytus, it'd be less of an issue. But with a tropical animal, we don't mind that radiation of heat as much because it levels out our gradient more. Now, 4 feet is an incredible height, and trying to get that heat to penetrate down just won't work. So we have a bow that's set 12 to 8 inches beneath. That would be set with our day-night dimming thermostat to between 30 and 32 degrees. Then the animal can move across its thermal gradient from hot to cold. We've also discussed that the animal is of modulating arboreality. It doesn't always have to be up in a tree, it could be on the ground. So we need to afford it the opportunity to thermoregulate left to right as well as up and down. So we're going to have a heat pad that covers a third of the bottom of the tank. This would be on a separate mat start, and that would be set to maybe 27, 28 degrees, with the idea then that they can move down to this tank, this end of the tank, which would be maybe 23, 24 degrees. So it's about trying to just keep that gradient more shallow rather than just dropping off, which, as I've said, if it's a desert tank, cool. Tropical tanks, not so good. And this is a big snake that needs a lot of room when it's older, so we're forced to use a big enclosure. So we've got to think carefully about the way that we apply our heat and how these different styles of heaters affect gradients. So there may even be the need to have a secondary heater further in so that you can balance it and make it even more shallow. This is where, as an advanced keeper, you're used to setting up tanks and you will experiment and you will take measurements and you will change where appropriate. For intermediate and beginner keepers, that's the sort of skill set that you need to develop to be able to balance your enclosures properly for the needs of the animal. It isn't as simple as just going to pets at home and buying one bulb and thinking, oh, it'll be fine. It won't be fine. You need to sit, work, research, make sure your infrastructure is in place before you buy the animal. Okay? This is an egg-laying species. Eggs can be incubated at 29 Celsius in a vermiculite to water mix 3.5 to 1 ratio, so 3.5 parts vermiculite to 1 part water by volume. Hatching takes 50 to 70 days. These snakes have the potential to breed year round, depending on their locality and I would expect rainfall levels to act as a trigger, as it does with the royal pythons. For the most part, once settled and established, feeding isn't really an issue, but this is a triggered species and will lunge readily at food. The use of long tongues is a benefit for this. The animal may strike and drop repeatedly, and patience is a virtue. It is important this snake is not in a high traffic area of the home, so that stresses such as human presence may act upon it. This species really should be afforded a quiet corner for it to live in the house, or indeed in the collection room. Lots of movement can act as a trigger and set this animal off. Try to keep the tank busy with apparatus, foliage and visual barriers. These snakes are notorious snout rubbers, as we saw with the girl. She's healed up now, but their nostrils are quite flared and the skin around them is quite delicate, so it rubs and chaps easily. So the female of this pair has a scarred nose to being kept in a tub system at some point, leading to constant rubbing, and therefore that's why her nose looks slightly misshapen. We really must discuss the venom of the Blanding's tree snake. This is not a snake to be taken lightly, and care should be exercised with working with them. Their venom is delivered via a Devoyne's gland, and it runs down a groove and especially enlarged teeth towards the rear of the mouth underneath the eye. A rapid chewing motion repeatedly squeezes and releases the gland, whilst also slitting the local area with the tooth. The venom then runs down the grooves of the enlarged teeth. The venom contains a powerful neurotoxin, which can cause quite serious muscle pain, dizziness, chest pain and difficulty breathing, as well as abdominal cramps. Noted keepers and herpetologists such as Mark O'Shea and Tom Crutchfield have quite the respect for bites from this species. Care therefore should be exercised. This is obviously why I keep the handling elements of videos such as this to a minimum. 1, to avoid too much stress, and 2, to avoid a bite that would have come if I'd have kept trying to interact with them. Because of the sheer distance across the African continent covered, I've split their natural range into zones: Western, Central and Eastern. Here we can compare daytime high and nighttime low averages across the piece, as well as the seasonal wet and dry seasons. So, as always, at the end we're going to go through the climate data. So let's slide you into centre view. So we took 12 zones, took their 12 monthly averages, and we compared daytime high, nighttime low and rainfall, so that we can see how the seasons might shift and change. The strong red bar is the average. So for our 12 zones, so the Western group: Freetown, Sierra Leone; Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire; Kumasi, Ghana; and Lagos, Nigeria. Then the Central group: I'm not going to pronounce these correctly. Douala, Cameroon; Luba, Equatorial Guinea; Makoku, Gabon. This one's a bitch. Right, let's think. Ngaoundé, Cameroon. Answers on a postcard. And then the Eastern group: Bosom, which is just a hilarious name, Central African Republic; Goma, the Democratic Republic of Congo; Bujumbura, Entebbe, Uganda; and Bujumbura, Burundi. So let's take the Western group, which works across here. So this is this zone. Summer high is from January through till May, with averages 32, 32, 32.25, 32 and 31.5. So that's our daytime high. We then have seasonal attrition, which takes us down in July and August to our cool season, where the daytime high average drops out to 28 degrees. So it modulates by 4 Celsius. Throughout the year, it looks like a greater dip than it is. These are only single digits apart. So yes, we drop by 4 Celsius throughout the year before it rallies again to join it again in January. So our hot season runs from December through till April. Cool season runs from June until September. Nighttime low. So this is then the attrition from this is at night, with averages of 23.5 24.75, 25, 24, 24, 23, 23, 23. So actually, the modulates far less than during the day, but there is still a dip from 25.25 to 23. Ghana's the coolest of them all, running down to 22, which is far from frigid. Being British, I only wish our nights were 22 degrees. And then we've got the rainfall group. So this is potentially one of the major triggers because there's not a huge amount of change here. Even though the red line is the average, pay attention to some of these lines which are becoming perilously low to drought. So bear in mind as well that when I was looking at timeanddate.com, which is where I got the climate data from, I threw away the particularly dry zones because I didn't think it was reflective of the species. So I sought out the wettest zones within the range, and we still got drought periods where we're down to 3-1 millimeters of rain in the early part of the year. And for the most part, it seems that our dry season runs from December through till March. And then it builds into a crescendo where May, June and July are absolutely soddened. Dries off slightly for August, rallies again in September, October, and then plummets for that winter period. So we can imagine then that if we've got a period of drought, then the rains come, the grasses and the trees grow, the mammals and the birds come, they start nesting. This is peak season. More than likely breeding will have taken place and hatching will occur around here, around July, August, if all the other data from the other species we studied is anything to go by, even though that data is not actually available in any written text I could find for captive husbandry of Toxicodryas. The central group, so Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon and Cameroon again, here. Much more levelled off, nowhere near the variation. 31.25 with a bottoming out at 27.5. So we've got like maybe 2.75 to 3 degrees change year round on average. And you can see that actually they all behave in a very similar manner. There isn't really any aberrances like we've seen over there. Nighttime lows. So things are starting to climb now in altitude. So the further east we go, you may find that the attrition at night because of the elevation is greater, and that holds true because of Burundi, which is the purple line, which shows the most attrition at night. And we're talking about averages of 21, 22, 23. So we've got a bottomed out temperature of 21 Celsius, peak temperature of 23.5 Celsius. So our season for rainfall is delayed. So we can see that our average, we start off with the same dry season, but it takes far longer to build. The initial spike is not there. We get a spike later in the season. So if it's of Central African origin, then the trigger point for the season and for breeding may occur at a later point in the year, if the data from the rainfall is anything to go by, because this then obviously controls growth of crops, of plants, of then pests and things that feed upon these plants and trees, so the birds nest and everything else. So you might find that there's modulation across the continent as we wait for the wet season to arrive. The eastern group, now we are at high altitude, or get comparatively. So we've got Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda and Burundi. And then, where am I? Yeah, Uganda and Burundi. So pretty much level the whole way through, 28.25 to 27.25. We have the grand total of 1 degree shift on the daytime average. So it's pretty much linear year round. The average is here, 17.75, let's see, 19. So yeah, 1.25 degrees on average shift at night. Daytime high and nighttime low are not the triggers. They're linear. So this is where the rainfall comes. So there is a definite shift. And we've almost reversed the polarity, where the dry season comes June, July, August, and it actually almost hits drought levels in certain regions such as Burundi, but then rallies for the later periods of November, December, January and February, where we're getting big numbers, you know, 180 to 200 mil per month. So these are considerably moist seasons. The central group peaks out at 350 mil per month, and that is in Douala, Cameroon. And on the western group, it peaks out at Freetown, Sierra Leone, at what must be about 230 mil. So these wet seasons are considerably wet, and we really are almost plummeting down to zero at certain points. So the rainfall changes and modulation in therefore humidity and everything else within the tank could potentially act as quite a vital trigger for the onward breeding of the species. There may be multiple chances in captivity for them to breed, because we keep them at perfect in the perfect environment or the perfect temperature range year round, and we give them an abundance of food, so nutritionally they're replete. So as with a lot of colubrids, you may find that they multi-clutch per year. I hope you enjoyed the video. I found it a really interesting species to study. We'll be back again soon with another video. All the best, guys. See you soon.